Good afternoon to everyone in India, and good morning to those who are joining from Europe. My name is Samrat Kumar. I am the country representative of EURAXESS here in India. We are the organizers of this webinar. This webinar is a kind of follow-up of the first webinar we had on the Marie Curie Individual Fellowship Program. I know that many of you who have attended that webinar are also joining here today. Those who are new to this program, welcome. We are very happy to have distinguished speakers today who will guide you through the application process of this very prestigious, fully EU-funded 2-year postdoc program. I would say it's one of the best funded programs in the world, the Marie Curie Individual Fellowship. I would like to take the opportunity to welcome our main speaker, Dr. Bronwyn Hyde. She's the Senior European Advisor at the UK Research Office in Brussels. Bronwyn is also an NCP for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions and the European Research Council grants. Welcome, Bronwyn, to our webinar. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Charuta Kulkarni. Charuta is a very dear colleague of our EURAXESS team here. She is herself a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions Individual Fellowship recipient, currently doing her postdoc at the Open University in the UK. Charuta, welcome from London. We're very happy you are here, and you will also give your insights to this, for how to write a successful proposal for the Marie Curie Individual Fellowship Program. Last but not least, a warm welcome to Dr. Praveen Kumar. He's also a very dear colleague and supporter of the EURAXESS India network. Praveen is a assistant professor of the School of Material Sciences at the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science in Kolkata. But more today, he will be in the role of the chair of the Marie Curie alumni chapter, the Indian chapter. Praveen, of course, is also a recipient of this individual fellowship grant, which is already some years ago, but he's very engaged and enthusiastic about Marie Curie and the different programs. And Praveen will also share about the Alumni Association and also about his own journey as a postdoc in Europe. So I will not take more time of you now and pass the mic to our main speaker, Dr. Bronwyn Hyde. Bronwyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for that warm welcome. I'm just going to show my screen. Can everybody see my screen now? I'm hoping that that is.
Yeah, just enlarge it. Okay. If you can enlarge it.
Yes?
Yes, very good. Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you very much for the warm welcome and for inviting me to speak today. I have to admit, I get very excited about all things Marie Curie. So I'm really excited to speak to you today a bit about the practical kind of hits and tips and to help you understand what goes into putting together a successful Marie Skłodowska-Curie Individual Fellowship proposal. Just very, very briefly, as was mentioned, I work for the UK Research Office. We are based in Brussels, but we're actually part of the UK Research and Innovation, which is a UK funding council for research and innovation. And we're part of their international office, where we have 3 other offices as well worldwide, in addition to our office in Brussels. And as was already mentioned, we also, in addition to our day-to-day activities, support and provide the national contact points for both ERC and the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. And I'm here today as part of the wider Marie Curie NCP network. So every member state does have an NCP. So though I'm obviously here to help you today, and I'm happy to answer as many questions as possible, if you've got very specific questions about your proposal, particularly if they are related to host organization or the country of which your host is located, then it's really important that you contact the Marie Curie NCP in that country, and they'll be able to provide you with a lot of really good guidance and assistance in putting together your proposal. Now, I am coming from the UK, and this is a question that we get quite a lot, so I will do one little UK-specific thing right at the beginning, which is to explain the UK's participation in European funding since the UK has left the EU at the end of the end of January 2020. So, as I said, The UK formally withdrew from the European Union on the 31st of December of this year. And on the 1st of February, the withdrawal agreement came into place. And the withdrawal agreement is an agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And the terms of the withdrawal agreement mean and ensure that the UK can continue to participate in EU programs, which includes Horizon 2020, which are financed by the current multi-annual financial framework. And this is for the lifetime of those grants. The withdrawal agreement ensures that UK participants will continue to receive EU grant funding for the lifetime of those projects. And this includes projects which are awarded and or finish after the transition period at the end of 2020. So in the case of the IFs, the grants will be awarded in February 2021, and that funding will be guaranteed through the terms of the withdrawal agreement. And just to support this statement and hopefully to really convince you that the UK is able to participate in the current call in terms of hosting European fellows, through the European fellowships or those who wish to go on a global fellowship as the return host. The MSCA Curie website itself also has a statement about Brexit and the implications this has for MSCA Curie action projects. And it clearly states that the UK can participate as if it were a member state in all MSCA Curie actions until the closure of those programs. So again, just to hopefully providing you with a little bit more reassurance that if you are thinking of coming to the UK through an individual fellowship, that this is actually still able to do that for the 2020 call. Again, if you've got questions, I am happy to answer them about Brexit and how it works and the implications, but this is hopefully reassuring you enough to go ahead with your application. So now on to the bulk of the presentation, which is really to focus on the individual fellowships. I will give a very brief overview just to make sure that we all have a common understanding. And then I'll really focus in on the evaluation criteria, how to address the key elements of the evaluation criteria, and again, some of the cross-cutting issues that are really important to bear in mind when putting your proposal together, as well as some proposal development tips, so things to think about and reminders when putting together a successful MSCA Curie proposal. So just a little bit about MSCA Curie in general, just to get started. MSCA Curie sits within the excellent science pillar of Horizon 2020 to really emphasize that excellence is a key component of MSCA Curie, particularly for individual fellows. This is the excellence of the applicants or the fellow themselves, the excellence of the institution to which they want to be hosted, and the excellence of the research and training program to which they are putting together as part of the fellowship. In previous framework programs, MSCA Curie actually sat in what was then called the people pillar. And it's also really important to understand this because people are still at the heart and is a fundamental element of MSCA Curie. It is about the development of individual researchers and their careers. And this is still a really, really strong component of MSCA Curie. Just to kind of support that, the whole policy aim for MSCA Curie is to equip researchers with the skills and international experience to be successful, to develop new knowledge, ensure that they have access to excellent research training, that they have attractive careers, and again, also to support diversity and equal opportunities. And you'll see that those main aims are then reflected in their policy objectives and the key features that you see within MSCA Curie. The key features that this is completely bottom up. It will fund, particularly the fellowships, anything from basic researcher all the way through to near market uptake. It encourages, and particularly for MSCA Curie, it is a requirement that you have cross-border and as well as cross-sectoral mobility. It's really about enhancing the skills of the individuals behind research and innovation, really supporting and encouraging the dissemination and public engagement, making sure that the messages and the interest in research that you're undertaking is really getting out there and is being utilized as widely as possible. And also, again, as I mentioned, gender balance. Gender will come up quite a few times, and I actually, as part of the cross-cutting issues, will touch on a little bit more there as to what they mean in terms of gender. So very specifically about the individual fellowships, just to make sure everybody, again, is on the same page, there are two main types of fellowship: European fellowships, where you have someone who is based in a third country or in another EU member state or an associate country who wants to then relocate to come into in the case of someone who's already based in the EU to different member states, someone who's outside to come actually into the EU. And these are generally between 12 and 24 months. There's some specific mobility requirements, and there's a number of different panels, the standard panel and the subject panel, and then there are some very specific panels depending on your status and needs of your project. Then the second type is the global fellowships. This is someone who is a national or long-term resident of a member state who would then be going to spend 12 to 24 months in a third country, and then the return phase back in an EU member state. And the panels for that are all subject-specific panels. If you've got questions about eligibility about the different panels, I'm very happy to answer them later. But equally, it's important to talk to your host institution, and then the NCP in that host country will also be able to help you and advise you on eligibility against the different panels. In terms of the evaluation is the same. It's just the difference is about the eligibility criteria. Just to remind everybody that the deadline is the 9th of September at 5 p.m. Brussels time. They are very tight on this, so unfortunately it is also 5 p.m. on their time. So if your computer is a little fast or a little slow, you need to keep this in mind. If you submit at 5:01 on your computer, but in Brussels it was 5 o'clock, unfortunately they will see that you are ineligible because of 5 o'clock on their time is what counts. So submit early and submit often. The proposals will be evaluated throughout October and December, and you should be informed of the final outcomes in early February 2021. The host beneficiary will sign the grant agreement with the Commission between February and March, and then you'll be able to start your fellowship between March 2021 and September 2022. It's really important to have a frank and honest discussion with your supervisor as to when you would be able to start and take up the fellowship. This is important in terms of actually writing the proposal as part of the evaluation and a part of criteria. You need to be able to justify the impact, why you're wanting to do the project that you are doing, and you have to put in a Gantt chart which includes a realistic time frame. And this all needs to be in the context of when you would want to be starting. Your justification for your project, say you were to start in March, might be very different for a justification and the research objectives chosen if you were to start in September 2022, particularly depending on your research area and the type of project which you will be undertaking. So just again, to a few key features of the individual fellowships before we start on the evaluation criteria, so that you can make sure that everybody really understands what we're trying to achieve, is that the individual fellowships are an individual grant for the experienced researcher to support their mobility, the research and training projects. And an experienced researcher is someone who at the call deadline, which is the 9th of September, will be in possession of their PhD or will have at least 4 years of full-time research experience. And it's quite a common question as to what is meant by this 4 years of full-time research experience. So I do have a couple of frequently asked questions that I've at the very end, and I can go through it in more detail there. Though I say it is an individual grant for the experienced researcher, it's also important to understand that this is the supervisor's grant as well. They will be the ones who will be responsible in terms, in the eyes of the Commission, through the host beneficiary. So it's really important, and I'll say this later on as well, that the supervisor is fully involved in the entire proposal development process, and that you have really good communication with them from the very beginning. Another key feature is the intersectoral elements, the opportunities to gain new knowledge inside and outside academia, opportunities within and outside Europe. There are specific eligibility criteria depending on the panels to which you want to apply, but these relate to mobility. There's no eligibility criteria based on nationality, age, or your career stage restrictions. So you can, as long as you meet the definition of an experienced researcher, then you can apply. So the individual fellowships really aim to enhance the creative and innovative potential of the experienced researcher, to provide them with opportunities to acquire and transfer new knowledge, to support their reintegration from outside Europe or back in, to promote people who've had a career break for any reason. This could be for family, for caring responsibilities, or it could be that they've just unfortunately not been able to secure a research contract, which is also very common. But encouraging research to come back to work in a non-academic sector. MSCA are really open. Non-academic is literally anything that is not academic. It's a charity, it's an arts institution, it's an NGO, it's an SME, it's a large industrial partner. It really is anything that is just not considered to be academic. I won't go through the expected impact, only to highlight that what they are really expecting these projects to do is to increase the skill set. So this is both the research and the transferable skills, thereby improving the employability and the career prospects of the fellow. And this is really crucial to understand. We'll go through it a bit. Obviously, we'll discuss this when we go through the evaluation criteria. But this project is not just about research, and it's very easy to get carried away with coming with an amazing research project, but it's about the full integration of research and training. And they use the tagline of training through research, and this is really important that you've got a project where the research and the training are absolutely interlinked, and it's a very cohesive approach to both research and training. Projects, unfortunately, that kind of think of the training as being a secondary element to the research will not score as high through the evaluation criteria and are less likely to be successful. So I've mentioned the evaluation criteria. You see it's based on excellence, impact, and implementation. And there's a different weighting of between the three, and this is really important to understand. We're getting close to 10,000 applications every year for the Marie Curie individual fellowships, and most of them are very high quality, excellent applications. And as you could imagine, as a result, you get a number of projects which will score exactly the same score overall. And so how do you decide which is funded and which is not? They will then look at the breakdown criteria. Who scored the highest for excellence? Who scored the highest for impact? Who scored the highest for implementation? And in the case of all those three being equal, which does happen quite frequently, they will then look at things such as gender. Who has addressed gender in the proposal more effectively than someone who has not? So focusing on excellence is really about the quality and credibility of the research and innovation project. And this is really important in this section to really make sure that you are very clear as to why this project and why now. How is this project really exciting? How is it groundbreaking and cutting edge? How does this relate to your plan methodology and approach? You can even use things like my research objective 1 relates to my methodology 1. It needs to be very, very clearly laid out in the proposal and very well linked between them. What you're doing is creating a narrative that is very easy for the evaluators to follow and to find the necessary information. You need to highlight any inter and multidisciplinary aspects and also any gender aspects that might be relevant to your research. The feeling is that if at any time now or in the future your research might apply to humans, then there will be a gender aspect to your research. There are some definite subject areas where there is no gender element. This could be in things like high particle physics or even astronomy, and there'll be many other areas as well, potentially in mathematics. It really depends on your project. Many subject areas already quite effectively cover gender, but it's about being explicit in the way that you write it into your proposal. And what you really also need to do in this first section is really explain how this project, how this fellowship will really open up and help the applicant to develop their career and collaboration opportunities. And this falls into the second criteria, which is about the appropriateness and the quality of the training and the two-way transfer of knowledge. It's very easy, particularly if you're a more junior researcher coming into a more well-established lab, to think that you as the applicant are going to get everything out of this, that you are going to be able to gain lots of knowledge, and that you unfortunately might feel that you then have nothing to bring. And this really has to be a two-way transfer of knowledge. And actually you will have something to bring. You have something to bring by the simple fact that you have never been in that lab before, that you have gone through an education system that is very different. You might have had other experiences in terms of training that you can bring with you, and you have your own network. So it's those elements that you will be discussing. Now, it might be true that to the direct supervisor, you will have limited transfer of knowledge, but to the other postdocs, to the PhD students, to the master students, to the undergraduates, summer placement students, or to the other members of the department, the team, the organization, depending on how it is set up, that you will have something to share with them, and this is something that you will discuss in your proposal very, very explicitly. And this is the key, is you need to be explicit and not just say, I will do something, but I'm going to do X, and this is how I'm going to do it, and then link that to things like the Gantt chart. As I already mentioned, it is about training through research. For those who would be thinking about going for a global fellowship, you also need to talk about this in terms of the partner organization who will be hosting you in the third country, but also then how you transfer that back to your European host. There is no extra space for global fellowships, but unfortunately, you do have to put in a lot more because everything you describe for the EU host, you also have to describe for the host in the third country. The quality of the supervision and kind of integration to the team, which relates to the knowledge transfer, is also really important. It does not mean that you have to go for a more experienced supervisor, and often in the UK in particular, we would advise more junior researchers, those who are just setting up a lab, to actually use MSCA Key as a way to help develop their own research careers and also the capacity within their research groups. What they need to describe and what you'll be looking at is what are the qualifications and experience they've had to date which would make them successful. Have they had undergraduate students that they have been supervising, or master students? Have they been a leader of a chair of a committee? Do they have a position within learned society? You know, are they involved in peer review? All those other activities that would show that they have the qualifications and the experience to be able to support you to be successful in your fellowship. You also need to discuss the capacity for yourself as the applicant to reach and reinforce professional maturity, and this will really depend on where you are in your career stage. So it does not matter if you're an early, so you just meet the definition of an experienced researcher, or you're someone who maybe already has a permanent position and who will be looking for further career development. What you need to be able to explain is how this fellowship will allow you to grow and develop to where you would like to be either at both the end of the fellowship, but also maybe 2, 3, or 5 years at the end. What is your long-term goal? And it's really important to kind of think about this. You might not explicitly state all of this in the proposal, but it will help you with shaping and developing your proposal, particularly in terms of the training that you will need to do. And your CV can help with this. And often we tend to have bullet points with no narrative in your CV, and it's actually not a problem, and I encourage to have a little bit of narrative in your CV to help explain your excellent track record and how well you have been doing to date. Again, impact really relates to what we've just talked about, the potential of the future career prospects of the researcher. And what I'm hoping you're already sensing is that all of the evaluation criteria are very interlinked. And it's really about developing a cohesive story narrative that really outlines everything from the very first line to the very last line of your proposal. I will say this now, there will be no white spaces on your proposal. If there are white spaces, you probably haven't addressed everything in the way that it needs to be addressed to be successful. What you want to think about in your training and research competencies, so what will you be acquired? So it might be that you'll be learning a new methodology, it might be that you'll be learning presentation skills, you might be learning about intellectual property, but all this will be acquired through this project, and you need to be very clear and explicit about this. You need to have a very concrete plan with regards to dissemination and exploitation, and this needs to be included in the Gantt chart. Often the plans for dissemination and exploitation and with that public engagement are often left to the end or not very fully defined, or they use some kind of standard, obvious ways of doing things. I will have a website, I will use a Twitter account. And what you need to think is a little bit beyond the obvious. And many institutions actually have teams within them that can help you in terms of dissemination and exploitation and public engagement. They will have innovation offices. And even at this stage of the proposal stage, it's really important to speak to them, and they can help you to identify target audiences for your research that you might not have thought about, as well as activities that you can undertake to reach those groups. And this is the type of thing that they want to see in your proposal. This also requires not only for you to have a very good communication with your supervisor, but also to have very good communication with your host institution, even at the proposal stage. The third element under impact is the quality of the proposed measures, again, to communicate, which really does relate to the second one, except this one is more about public engagement as opposed to the dissemination of the research results. So really, again, having clear goals and objectives. And one thing to think about is what kind of public engagement activities are out there, and MSCA Curie actually run a number of them, such as the Science is Wonderful, at the Research and Innovation Days. They have a number of public engagement awards. They have a European Researchers Night, so even within Method Curie, there's a number of things that you could be a part of to really help get this through, and they really encourage you to do that. In terms of implementation, it's really about having a cohesive work plan, making sure that you've got appropriate allocation of your tasks, i.e. the methods are set up clearly, when the time frame of when you're actually going to be doing your different activities is also very clearly outlined, and this should be included in the Gantt chart that is specified in the application. Please do not modify or change the Gantt chart in any way. You need to use the one that is in the template. And it needs to be very clear and realistic. And within the Gantt chart, what you also want to include is not just your research plan, but also your training plan and any public engagement and dissemination and exploitation plans as well. People often forget to include dissemination and exploitation in the Gantt chart, and this is often commented upon in the evaluation summary reports as being a weakness of those proposals. You want to describe the management structure. So what is the structure that the host organization has in place to help you to be successful? And many institutions will be able to help you write this. Some of them will actually have what we would call a boilerplate template that they can say, this is what you would need to put in. This is how we've always done it. This is how we will support you. So again, it's really important to discuss this with your host institution. Also to think about any risks and mitigation. So, if methodology A doesn't work, what could we do instead with methodology B? Those types of thoughts, and this needs to be clearly outlined in your proposal. You want to talk about the institutional environment. So what do they have to offer you in terms of infrastructure, training and development opportunities, that can facilitate you and help you to be successful. Now, they might not have all the infrastructure that you might need, and that is absolutely fine. And this is where you would bring in short visits, secondments, research trips, and you would discuss that. Ideally, again, they might be part of a network that will help you to understand where you need to go to get access to the different resources in order for you to be successful. You don't have to pick a host that has absolutely everything, but you do need to ensure that you've got the right level of engagement across the board to make sure you do have access to all the resources that you need. For the global fellowships, you have to describe all of this for the outgoing host as well. I mentioned in the very beginning that I would touch upon a couple of cross-cutting issues. The first one is that you will be obliged to publish in open access, in open access journals, and this also relates to data, with a mandate that it is as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So if there's a very good reason as to why you cannot make the data open, then that is fine. But the idea is that you go open and then only would effectively go closed if it was absolutely necessary. And you will need to have a data management plan as a deliverable in the first 6 months. So I highly encourage you to include that in your Gantt chart. The second aspect is gender and intersectionality. And this is, as I've already shown you, an explicit evaluation criteria under excellence. And then it touches upon two things, one which I call kind of the HR, which is about side of things, about making sure that you've got equal opportunities amongst seconded staff, that in terms of your management structure, you've got a gender balance. But it goes beyond just those types of considerations to actually looking at what is termed the gender dimension of your research.
Bronwyn, sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you. No, you're not running. Everything is fine. Your audio is a bit breaking. Would it be possible to switch off the camera, maybe to improve the audio quality?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the interruption.
No, absolutely not a problem. So in terms of the research dimension of the gender dimension of your research, so if you follow this link, it will bring you to an excellent website that's been done with the European Union and Stanford University, which has a large number of examples of how gender can influence research, and not just in areas where we typically would think about it, such as in the life science, but much more widely, even in things like urban planning and development, engineering and such. And just a very quick example would be things like actually the seatbelt development in a car. It was designed for a medium-sized man. It's, as anyone who is not a medium-sized man can tell you, it probably doesn't fit very well, even if you're a large man or a short man or a woman or pregnant or not. And so it's these types of things that you need to think about when you're putting your proposals together. It also relates to the dissemination and exploitation and to public engagement activities. And again, your institution might be able to help you with this, but I would highly recommend you look at this website. It's got some really good examples of how to address gender in your proposal and kind of areas, and kind of make you think a little bit more about how this might be relevant for your research work. And now on to the crux, I think, that everybody is looking for, is the proposal to advice. And I haven't used the word guide for applicants yet, but I will use it now about 50 times in a row, not quite that many, but when I say read all the called documentation and evaluation criteria, I'm effectively saying read the guide for applicants. And I say again, read the guide for applicants. It contains absolutely all the information that you will need to be successful in developing your proposal. It explains the scheme, it sets out all the steps in order to actually submit the proposal using the online system, and it clearly lays out all the evaluation criteria, and it includes a draft of the proposal template. So just in case you missed it, read the guide for applicants, live with the guide for applicants. It will be by your side throughout every aspect of developing your proposal. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is that when you're writing the proposal, that your supervisor or principal investigator and the fellow need to be involved quite heavily together, and with input from the host institution. The fellow should not be left to write this on their own. Even the most experienced fellow will need support. European funding have a very specific language that they like. They have a very clear layout of how they want it to look, in sense that it needs to be very easy to follow and in line with the template. And if you are very new to this type of writing, it can be very, very difficult. And this is why having the input from the supervisor and PI is critical. It's also really important, just more generally, for the success of your project, if it is to be awarded, to have a good communication. And this starts in the proposal development stage, so that everybody has the same expectations. You don't want to be, as a fellow, putting in things like comments and short visits, to which actually the supervisor then later on says, well, wait a minute, I don't agree. Right? Or equally, the PI who is writing the grant might then, without any input from the fellow, might put in some comments and research visits, to which then the fellow says, actually, that's not going to work for me. So it's really important to have this three-way conversation where the host is also involved, because there might be things and restrictions from that host institution or the way that they do certain things that needs to be considered. But equally, there's certain sections like the implementation section that they can really help put together, and particularly when they're talking about the infrastructures of the institution and the management structure. Now, one of the things that's also very key, as I mentioned at the very beginning, MSCA Curie sits in excellence. And within that is about the excellence of the applicant, of the fellow themselves. So the fellow does need to have a strong CV, but this is in relationship to their career stage. It is not about having 10 publications or X number of first author publications or having a high cited publication. If you just finished your PhD and the expectation from your field would be that you would have not published, that's absolutely fine. If you're 20 years into your career, and you have not published, that might not be fine, depending on your area as well. It might be that if your area, by this time, they would expect 2 manuscripts and you have 2 manuscripts, and that is absolutely fine. It's really about your career stage and your subject area. The evaluators are experts. They do understand the expectations for each of the individual areas. Again, as I mentioned, your CV can have a little bit of narrative. So, for example, if you are fortunate enough to have a publication, then you could say, actually, this and even if you say it's a multiple author publication and you're in the middle, there's nothing to stop you from saying, I was responsible for undertaking this piece of work within this larger paper, if that's something that you want to do. And that can be quite helpful to the evaluators as well, by trying to understand and ensure that you are the right person for doing the job. And by the job, I mean the project. Though this is completely bottom-up, it is important to think about any relevant EU policy documents, depending on your subject area, and particularly depending on what your expected outcome of the project will be. As I mentioned, the evaluators will be experts, but they may not be experts in your exact area of research. So therefore, it's really important that you use very clear and concise language. Explain and actually try to avoid any country and research area specific jargon. Include diagrams, images, and tables if appropriate to help support the text that you have included. It's really important to meet your planned supervisor or fellow, and obviously in this current context that would be a virtual meeting. But again, it's really important that you do have regular contact with them throughout the proposal development stage. Would also encourage you to research previous and current projects, and if possible, even to read some successful projects, and not necessarily from your research area. What you want to look for when you're reading them is what is the type of language, the structure, the layout, the emphasis, the argument that they have laid out as to why they've been successful. Sometimes if it's in your own subject area, you can lose that by getting focused on the science. Most host institutions will have a database or at least 1 or 2 proposals that they can share with you. So it's really important to ask your supervisor if they can request that from the host organization or to request that from the host organization directly. You can Google search. I think there are a few out there. I don't know how good they are, but I do know that they do exist. I would always recommend going to the host institution or even possibly going through the Curie Alumni Network and asking if any of the current or past fellows would be willing to share their fellowship application with you. And then the final thing that's really key is to get someone to proofread your drafts. And this is, again, someone who's probably not directly in your subject area. You give them a copy of the evaluation criteria and you ask them to go through it and truly evaluate it as an evaluator would, looking for those common areas that are often overlooked, because as the person who's writing it, we assume that it's obvious. We know why this is important. And often it's those arguments that get missed when you're writing this because it's so dear to your heart. And those are the types of things that's really useful to have someone who's less familiar with your work to pick up when they're actually reading the draft. Now, talking to some evaluators, I've asked them for a few comments. They've also suggested and remind people that they are not necessarily experts in their area, but they are experts. They also only get the same information that you get in terms of the evaluation criteria. They take this incredibly seriously, but they are doing this as part of their day job. That's just something to bear in mind and kind of relates back to making this as easy to read as possible. But they are doing this on top of full teaching and writing their own grant. One thing that they really want to encourage you to think about is to think beyond the science. So as I mentioned before, to identify the training needs. This is an area that they see quite frequently is not clearly defined and often missed, or the training is added on as kind of an afterthought. So it's really about getting the science and the training right. And this, very disheartening for them when they see some excellent science, but they've really not thought about the training, and unfortunately they'll have to score them lower. They often see this two-way transfer of knowledge missed, so they very clear in the proposal what the fellow will be getting out of moving as part of the fellowship, but the additional transfer from the fellow to the host institution is often not very clearly laid out. And as I said, it's not necessarily just to the supervisor, but to the group, to the department, to the center, to the organization, depending on the structure of the host organization that you're going to. And this needs to be very, very clear with concrete examples. They also see it's very obvious when the supervisor has not actually had enough time, and even the fellow have not had enough time to really commit and put the energy into the project and the proposal development. So it's really important that you do give yourself enough time. These actually take more time to put together than you would think. And so you're here now, which means I'm hoping that you've started writing or about to start writing, but you really need to kind of really start to develop that and starting to put things on paper now for the September deadline. It's important to remember that the application is a co-production between the supervisor, the fellow, and the research institution. Again, kind of reinforces the point above it, that they can really tell when the supervisor has had very limited input into the application. They say it's actually very obvious, and it usually means that the quality of the proposal is much lower. They also then start to question a little bit about the commitment that though it's not part of the evaluation criteria, it's a personal reflection, and they then do kind of question whether or not there is a long-term commitment to support the fellow while they're actually going to be the host institution. Tables and diagrams can be really helpful, but they need to be clear. So if they're not going to be clear or they don't actually help to support the argument that's being made in the text, then there's no point in adding them. And they also recommend that you get someone unrelated to the project to to read through it and to make sure it's clear. They recognize that most of the applicants are not going to be English speakers, that English will not be their first language. So if there are grammatical errors, things of that nature, that is fine. And to be honest, they get evaluators from all over the world. So many of them will also not have English as a first language. So I wouldn't worry so much about that, but within that, you still need to make sure that your message is very clear and concise. So just to let a few things that often come up, though you might think are quite obvious, please make sure to use the current template, which can be downloaded from the online submission system. Every year we do get a number of questions at the very last minute saying, oh, we've just realized that there's been a slight change in the wording or the layout, things of that nature. Make sure you include all the mandatory tables and respect the page limit.
185 ou 500 au lieu, mais il y en a combien? On ne sait pas. On a reçu un message comme quoi quelqu'un.
If someone doesn't like turning their microphone off, that would be great.
Écoute,
thank you.
moi je crois.
And then just.
Sorry, please mute your mics. Whoever is talking right now, please mute your mic. Thank you.
So just a few common questions that we get. So who submits the application? And this reflects to the fact that actually the supervisor has a key role to play. The responsibility, and this is an FAQ on the funding and tenders portal. So this is from the commission, that only the supervisor appointed by the organization can act on its behalf. And as such, only the supervisor should press the submit button. The system does allow for the researcher to hit submit. So you need to be very clear as to who will have that role and what the implications would be if the fellow is actually the one to hit the submit button. We also get questions about eligibility, specifically with regards to this definition of an experienced researcher and the 4 years of full-time equivalent research experience. So the question we get is, I will not be in possession of the PhD by the 9th of September. My viva will have been just before or just after. Am I still eligible? And provided that you can still demonstrate that you have at least 4 years of full-time research experience, you're eligible. And they talk about 4 years of full-time research experience from the degree that would have enabled you to undertake a doctorate. So if either in India or the country to which you want to be hosted allows, say, for example, a bachelor's degree to enable you to undertake a PhD, then any time spent doing research as part of a master's program, interning, anything like that would then count towards the 4 years of full-time equivalent research experience. If you're not sure whether or not you meet that requirement, then again, this is where the NCPs and your host institution can really help you. There's no harm in just dropping them an email and saying, the copy of your CV and saying, actually, I won't have had my PhD, but I think I've got 4 years full-time equivalent research experience. Can you please check? And they'll be able to go through that for you. Often we get a lot of questions about whether or not the supervisors can support more than one application per year, and that's absolutely yes. What you want to make sure is that they will have the capacity in order to support all of you if they are successful, but there's nothing stopping a supervisor from having more than one application and more than one fellow at any one given time. However, as a fellow, you can only apply to one host institution. If you do submit and apply with more than one host institution, then the European Commission will contact both supervisors and yourself as a fellow and ask which one is to be evaluated. If no one gets back to them, then they will pick the first one that went into the submission system to be evaluated, and the second one will not be evaluated. So you do not put in more than an application with more than one host institution as a way to hopefully increase your chance of getting a proposal. But unfortunately, the system will not allow that to happen, and it will not allow both of them to be evaluated. We also got a lot of questions about how to find a host. So there's quite a few partner search tools out there, but the best way that we have found is actually through your network. So talk to current supervisors, undergraduate supervisors, friends. They might be able to put you in contact with a colleague, someone that they might have met at a conference. If you've been attending conferences already, you might have met someone there and dropping them an email. Particularly in the UK, and I know this is in other member states as well, they're very open to being approached for fellows to come and work with them, particularly good quality researchers. And when you're selecting your host, what you really want to look at is what is your research and career development needs. There's no benefit to applying to one host organization over another or one member state over another. Your proposal will be evaluated solely on the evaluation criteria. There is no benefits given for where you want to go or who you want to work with. It's really against the evaluation criteria and what you put in that proposal. And that is what is key. It's not based on past performance of the supervisor or your own past performance. If it's not in the proposal, it is not taken into consideration, and it must be in line with the evaluation criteria. You can work part-time on your fellowships, but in your proposal, you would put it together as a full-time proposal, and then that would be a discussion that you would have with the project officer. So this will be someone from the commission who is assigned to your project to help you be successful. Whether or not you would want to, for the whole duration or part of it, to go part-time. This could be either for professional or personal reasons. And there are some limits with the Global Fellowship, but it's really important to understand that this is a weekly, monthly basis. So part-time is not 3 months in one country, 3 months back in on your fellowship. It has to be done on a weekly basis. If it's a case where you need to take large chunks, so months off of your fellowship, then you'd be looking at a different arrangement such as suspensions. Again, all this would be discussed and agreed with the project officer once the grant is awarded, and would not need to be discussed and should not be discussed in the proposal. The proposal is written as 100% full-time. And this is just to remind you to read the guide for applicants. As I've already said, it's crucial. Don't let it out of your sight. It really does give you everything, all the tools that you need to be successful. If you would like some additional information about how you can also look at these points, which includes the Curie work program. This is another link to the guide for applicants, just to kind of reinforce the message of how important it is. There's the information on the call page through the Marie Curie Alumni Association and EURAXESS, the very good tools, and through the EURAXESS Worldwide Network. The EURAXESS also have a career development app, so this wouldn't be necessary to include this in the proposal itself, but it can be quite a useful tool for you to help to identify your career development needs, which then reflects to what are the training opportunities that you need to have access to through the duration of your fellowship. And just to say that, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I am part of one of the NCPs from Marie Curie, and we are all together part of a network called Net for Mobility. And again, they also have a large number of resources, which includes a handbook for individual fellowships, which also provides a lot of very detailed information on what to address in each section. And they've also had a fellowship webinar. And again, specific questions can also be directed to the NCP in your proposed host country. And if you follow this link, you'll then be able to find a list of all the different NCPs across Europe and abroad. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Excellent, informative presentation, and very much in time. It was scheduled for 1 hour, and you did it within that hour. And really, I want to congratulate you. It was very informative. I think you addressed many questions which we already had received beforehand. We got, during your presentation, your session, some questions came in from our attendees, and I would like to take a few with you now. We have some time to do a Q&A. One question which we received was about ethical issues, ethical aspects of the proposal. How important is it to address them? Like, can you say something about that?
Yeah. If your project, so each project will need to do an ethics assessment, and actually they have a little checklist assessment that you will need to do. If over the course of doing that ethics self-assessment, ethical issues are raised, then it is crucial that you do address them in the proposal, and your host institution will be able to help you. It doesn't have to be very, very detailed, but you will need to do it, because actually after you'll have to do a much more detailed analysis, generally as part of your proposal. All projects will also go for ethical review after they've been evaluated. It really depends on your subject area. So if you are, say, in the health or you're working with subjects, obviously there are huge ethical considerations and they do need to be addressed. By not addressing them, you're more likely to do damage to your project. If you're working on something that's, say, mathematics, probably less ethical issues, you just need to worry about the ethics self-assessment.
Yeah.
Again, the NCPs can help you with this.
Yeah, as you said, it depends on the subject, on the area which you're working in, and of course you can also have your NCP in the host country as well. Could I take the next question, Bronwyn, with you? There is also one part where in the proposal about external training. Could you maybe give some kind of examples? What does it imply to have external trainings as part of the proposal, the project?
So as part of your training development needs, what you need to think about is what are the skills that you're missing. So those could be scientific skills or they could be personal development skills. And what we mean by personal development skills are all the others. So project management, personnel management, presentation skills, writing skills, dissemination skills, social media skills, gender skills. So the list really goes on and on. And again, in terms of research skills, they could be methodological or extra. For external training, it's about where you are going to get the training for those skills. So it could be an external provider, it could be going to on a research visit, to experience another laboratory who's using the technique that you need. But again, it really, unfortunately, a lot of these answers say it depends on the needs of the project and it depends on your needs. So there's no template of what it looks like. And this is where your host actually is very important because they will often know what kind of external companies that they might be using routinely or have been used by their fellows in the past. So that's something to look for as well. Now, obviously, I did say you need to be as explicit, but as the course of your training, new skills arrive that you need to get. There's nothing to stop you from going and getting them either.
So do you have to be already very specific about the training, the courses you're going to take, or
so you might not know the course. So you might not know that on February 2021 I'm going to go take a course in publication, authoring, because that's a bit. But you might say, actually, I know that I need support in writing. My institution offers a writing course, or I plan to take a writing course. It's that kind of detail. It's not just saying, I think I need some writing help, or I need some help with this. It's about saying, this is an identified need, and there will be opportunities for me to do this through the proposal, and this looks like how it will happen.
Okay. No, this is very, very good to know. Thank you, Bronwyn, for that. Another question which we got in was about publications. So do the number of publications during the PhD count in? Is it important to have lots of publications? And along with that, another question came in was, what about unpublished works which are about to be published soon? Should they also be mentioned in the CV?
So just one thing about unpublished work. Now, you need to think about where it is in the pipeline of unpublished. I intend to submit to Nature, right, is maybe very different than I have submitted it to Nature and it's gone for peer review. It's not been published, but it's in a different process because actually everybody applies for Nature and then it might get rejected and then you're going to apply for another one and another one and another one. So, and the reviewers are they know, they're experts, they've been around for a long time, they know how it works. So in some ways you want to be realistic and not oversell yourself an expectation because it might not happen. So you need to think about that. And this is where, again, advice from your host and your supervisor is really important. In terms of the number of publications, for example, during your PhD, it depends on your subject area. Some subject areas in some countries, you would not be expected to have published at all by the end of your PhD. And the UK is quite common for this. Many people will finish a 3-year PhD in the UK with no publications. So there's no expectation that this is the minimum criteria. What you want to show in terms of your excellence as a researcher is all the other activities. So what are the other things that you have been doing during the course of your PhD Maybe you set up a seminar series, or you went on set up a collaboration, or you gave a talk at a prestigious conference, or a poster presentation, or you won an award for your poster, or all the other things. This is different than someone who maybe is 10 years post-PhD who's got a tenured position. Because the expectations for someone who's got a tenured position is very different. Because to get tenure, you probably had to have a certain number of publications, you probably had to have grant funding, you probably had to have international collaborations and given talks at key conferences in your field. So that's what they would expect to see. And if they don't see it, and they see that you've got 10 years post-PhD and your tenure position, then that's going to count against you, because obviously you're not as excellent as the minimum criteria is for your career stage and the field that you're in. And hopefully that clarifies it a little bit. So I realize that it's really nice to be able to tell you have 5 publications or 2 publications is sufficient. Unfortunately, it's not that clear. It's really about your career stage and where in the field that you are in as well. Because some fields publish an awful lot. Other fields, you're looking at a manuscript, once every 5 to 10 years. So again, that's what they're looking at.
Okay. No, thank you for answering that. A few more questions. So what if I am unemployed or I'm self-employed? I'm not affiliated to a university. I have a PhD. I have a number of publications, also patents. Am I eligible for the individual fellowship?
So you absolutely are. I mean, provided that you meet the criteria of an experienced researcher. So despite not having a research contract, if you can show that you have at least, you've got the PhD, so that you would meet that definition, but just in general, provided that you have the 4 years of research experience, then it's fine. And actually, you would be eligible for the Career Restart Panel. So this is a multidisciplinary panel designed to support people who have been out of a research contract for at least 12 months in the 18 months prior to the call deadline. And so though the evaluation criteria is the same, it's a separate panel to which you are evaluated, meaning separate set of experts, and it's a multidisciplinary panel, and there's a higher weighting. So there's an additional weighting placed on those who go through the Career Restart Panel. And to be honest, the success rate is much higher. It's closer to 20% than for the standard subject panels, which is on average is 15%. So if you can, go for the Career Restart Panel. that's my recommendation. And again, there's no nationality requirements for that at all. So hopefully that clarified. Are there any other questions for now, or should I answer them later?
Actually, there's a delay in audio.
Okay.
That's why I think it's late.
Okay. We'll take 2 more questions. One, yeah, we have a couple of more. Actually, we have many questions, but I'm taking 2 more now. Is there a limit to apply for the fellowship? Like, can one apply more than 1 time?
So there's no limit. I mean, you can have multiple, like obviously not at the same time, because you are expected to be working 100% of your time on the fellowship. But you could have finished one and then apply for another one either immediately after or a period of time after. What you need to be able to clearly demonstrate is why you need the 2nd or the 3rd fellowship. It's often more difficult to make the case if they're immediately following each other, because what you've said in the first one is that will allow you to be really successful in your career. And most people will say at the end of this, I will get a permanent job, or I'll get a job. But obviously then that hasn't happened. So you need to be able to make the case as to why a 2nd one is important without saying actually it didn't go so well in the first one, for instance. It's often easier to have a little bit of a break with additional funding from elsewhere and then apply again at a later stage, because it's again about career development and progression. So that's just something to think about, but there is absolutely no restriction whatsoever on the number of times you can apply.
Yeah.
And there's one last question.
Samart, are you there? I think there's an audio delay for Samrat from me, because why he's getting the audio a little late. I think it's an internet issue. Just hold on a bit. I think Samrat will ask you the next question now. Actually, we have a lot of questions, a lot of keen researchers who are keenly listening to the presentation already. Yeah.
And it's sometimes also that
Turn my camera off, maybe that might help a little bit.
sometimes also, it's not that you get it at the first time, right? Sometimes you have to do one more attempt to apply for it.
Absolutely. There's no restriction on resubmission.
Can you hear
me? Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello? So is that better? I was going to say there is no restriction on resubmission at this stage. For Horizon Europe, there might be. At the moment, there's no restriction on resubmission, and it's usually quite useful to.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Yeah.
Perfect. So there's absolutely no restriction, and it can be quite good. Most people, there is a general, on average, a higher success rate for resubmission than there is for those who just applied the first time.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I think he did hear you.
Yeah.
Shumala?
Yes, I think the audio delay is something. So now he's hearing what Bronwyn has already told us already. So because the delay, I think there's about 30 to 50 second delay, because of which he's responding that much later. I think that there's some issue. So I think Bronwyn, thank you so much for answering our questions. I think we'll move, since Samart is having some issues in the internet issues, I'll just move ahead with the webinar. Charuta, I think I'll move on to you, and would request you to start your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Thank you so much, Bronwyn, for a fantastic presentation. You have really made my job very, very, very easy. But as I said earlier, as we were talking, that what I would like to do is I would like to basically present that how Mary Skłodowska-Curie Action individual fellowships are basically means of personal experiences which need to be personalized, which needs to be customized. So I'm Dr. Charuta Kulkarni. I'm working as a Mary Curie Fellow at the Open University, and of course CNRS France is also equally involved. And then I do have extended collaboration with Oxford and University of Southampton. So I'm here to acknowledge everybody all the way from European Union to Mary Skłodowska-Curie Action 2020 program to all the way to the University of Southampton. So I will start with this, and I will simply highlight few things that why Mary Curie Fellowship. So as Bronwyn has already laid out a plan for us, already laid out what are the stakes basically. So Mary Curie wants us to, the program itself wants us to get us as a fellow to get the excellent innovative research kind of training, which happens basically as a part of your career and knowledge exchange opportunity, which happens again as a as a part of the mobility which happens through the cross sector and cross border. So once again, one has to move on, one has to move to places when it comes to growing. So that is exactly is the core, that is exactly is the central premise of Marie Curie Fellowship. So it is about actually getting excellent research training, building your career, and doing that while being mobile, while being able to connect with the researchers across Europe, across the world as well. And in that process, you are doing something meaningful for your career, but also towards the society in terms of thinking some of the current and future societal challenges. So why Marie Curie Fellowship for this? Because there are tons of fellowships. There are few key highlights of Marie Curie Fellowship, which definitely I would like to, lay out right here. The first thing is the freedom. So freedom, it exists in the form of, project design, what kind of project you want to pitch in, as long as it's a fantastic and very innovative, very earnest kind of idea, you basically could pitch in easily with whatever kind of collaboration you need. You are free to collaborate with anybody across Europe or across the world for that matter if you're going for the global fellowships. But when it comes to specifically Marie Curie individual fellowships, you're talking about European hosts, you're talking about member states and associated countries, which could be non-EU countries as well. But once again, you can find your collaborators over there. You can travel to them, you can travel to their labs, you can travel to their, like that particular host institution, and you are able to achieve this in support of whatever career level you have. So, I mean, I'm not going to getting into nuances because Bronwyn has already done, as I said, fantastic job of explaining what each of this is and what are the stakes. So in terms of the Indian audience, in terms of from the perspective of the Indian audience, I would like to highlight the next part, which is in terms of the age restrictions, which is not that much, which is basically global in the context, but in terms of nationality, there are certain fellowships in the world which also says that they are exclusive to European nationals, they are exclusive to the, let's say, US nationals and whatnot. So there are no such nationality restrictions for the Marie Curie Fellowship, which is a fantastic part for any Indian researcher who wants to build his or her career. And the most important part along with it is, in order to build your career, getting a grant, finding a grant or writing one, and getting a funding for yourself, for your research, which could be interdisciplinary, which should be interdisciplinary at this stage. So this is something Marie Curie offers, a substantial bottom-up kind of funding. The funding comes to you as an individual fellow. It is essentially tied to you. Whatever you want to do it could be achievable through that particular grant. And once again, since it is so what's the right word, it's so competitive in one way, or it is basically where the stakes are absolutely high in terms of what you want to pitch in, where you want to pitch in, how you want to travel and whatnot. So with all these different things, one basically gets the, what should I say, gets to be under that MSCA or Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action H2020 umbrella, which itself gives a very prestige of the program itself, and which basically brought you in the different networks. So little bit about my specific story when it comes to Marie Curie. So that's why I said my story and Marie Curie. A little bit of rhyme over there. Is I'm a geologist and archaeologist in training. I got that training in various, institutions from India. Eventually, I decided that I need to integrate the skill set and knowledge base I have. So I integrated natural and social science training. I brought it to another program which existed in the United States. I was in New York doing my PhD in Earth and Environmental Sciences and trying to see how landscapes transform across the time. That is technically called as the environmental history, and trying to see that what does the parts of nature and culture basically do or play that particular role in order to transform this landscape, and what we can learn from them. So this is the kind of discipline which is technically, one could call, is looking back to the future, that we are looking into the future, trying to learn from what are the different climatic issues we had, what are the different societal issues we had, what are the different political issues we had, and bringing it all together, integrating that particular knowledge. What we are able to do is we are able to achieve certain past ecological analogs or stories or narratives, if you want to call it, and then work them towards the future environmental management or ecological management, to be precise. And then while doing all this, while conducting my PhD, what I always had in mind is I need to, like feed this back into Indian landscape. I need to feed this back into policy landscape where it is very well needed. I have that kind of skill set which is quite interdisciplinary already. So now it's time, once I finish my PhD, it's time for me to move, to be mobile, and to be able to go to a place where I can make an application of this particular interdisciplinary skill set towards the country I have been to, sort of my homeland, where there are certain key societal challenges which I am able to address on the science level, on the science side, from the other side of the table, to be precise. And how am I going to achieve this? So once again, that is how European Union or Marie Curie Fellowship came to be, or basically came into picture, where I basically said that I am able to pitch in this particular project, which basically has a global kind of context, although I'm specifically will be dealing with Indian context, and I'll tell you how and why in a second. But I think Marie Curie is a perfect place where I have this idea, I have freedom to choose to whom I can work with, and where I can work with, what kind of skill sets I need, those which I need to complement with the existing ones I have. So Marie Curie, essentially, the fellowship itself gave me an opportunity to build that. Marie Curie essentially gave an opportunity to take my story further, and that's why that could be sort of a bottom line or word of wisdom from my side, that when it comes to the Marie Curie Fellowship, it is very important that your story basically fits in whatever project story you are trying to tell. So it is very important because it is an individual fellowship. So you are very important here. You as a researcher should be able to tie your personal story into the science story you are trying to build and you are trying to tell. So what is my science story? So my Marie Curie project, Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action Individual Fellowship, so that is where that acronym comes in, MSCA IF. The project itself has an acronym. Once again, this is one of the nuances you need to get when you are writing the proposal, and I'll get to that in few slides actually. So my project is called as URNESS, which is basically trying to see certain kind of mixed use system which are technically called as agroforestry, which is like a mix between agriculture and the forestry, native trees being like laid out in order to get good agriculture. So it's like sort of a win-win kind of situation for the forestry in terms of increasing the forest cover, at the same time increasing the agricultural yields. So in case of India specifically, if you want to talk about that, there is another component which comes from the cultural side or the social side, is the actual something called as sacred forest grove, which is a cultural means of reforestation or conservation. So I knew about this in a way because I grew up in part of India where it existed. I have seen this for part of my life before moving to United States and whatnot. I have worked in these landscapes as such, but eventually when I started like digging into it, I realized these systems once again are not exclusive to India. These systems, both of these, agroforestry as well as sacred groves, which can often go hand in hand, they are basically there across the tropics. So this is nothing but this kind of landscape which keeps transforming, which also has the ecological side and which also has a social side, which are absolutely interesting. They are not just specific to India, but they are also they do exist in different parts of the tropics. And once again, the literature review is something which led me to this. So once again, one cannot just simply undermine the influence of reading as such. So when I was digging into this for my Marie Curie project, I just realized that agroforestry, or the practice of planting native shade trees in order to get better agricultural yield, is something India has been thinking about in terms of national agroforestry policy. So once again, I would not like to get into nuances. We can definitely talk about it, whoever is interested about it. But when I basically looked at the policy, the way it is getting implemented, I realized that there are two key players who would actually implement it. Since it's agriculture and the forestry, the two key players are farmers and the foresters. And when I started looking into their land management strategies, I started looking into how they like to manage their respective landscapes. It could be agricultural land, it could be forested or conservation areas, and when you plug them together, that becomes an agroforestry. So when I looked into their specific land management strategy, what I realized is they do have a conflicting interest in terms of how they could use the fire in terms of managing the landscape. So fire management is a kind of strategy. Humans have been living with them. Archaeologically, we know about it. Fire is one of the, you could say, or what we could say, one of the key milestones in human evolution as such. And people have been living with fires, modifying the landscape for years and years, meaning thousands and thousands of years. So that is something which are percolated in the agricultural knowledge or traditional knowledge over there, while the Indian forestry services as such, they do have a big no-no for fires, because they are led into a different kind of ecological knowledge. They do have the way they are built in a way. So I found this problem very interesting, and as an environmental historian, by training, paleoecology or past ecology, I do have a specific tool set where I can actually see what is the fire history of that particular landscape. So I'm able to look into past, I'm able to see how long does it go. If it goes that long, how it is going to be in that particular scenario when it comes to climate, when it comes to the social science side and whatnot. So that way I try to build it all together, because once again, as I said, I'm interested in each of this thing. I'm interested in agroforestry system, the landscapes. I'm interested in the social sides of it. As such, I'm interested in how climate basically exacerbates any successive problems in general, and what are basically the social conflicts which already exist, and why these social conflicts are so important to address through science, because they are going to hamper the actual implementation. If these two key players are in conflict with one another, that means this particular policy may or may not work that efficiently. So once again, I am absolutely interested in all the way from the core science to the actual application of any particular policy which is associated with land. And since I am passionate about it, that is something which get inculcated into the writing phase as such. So for that particular project to have it run or have it actually written up towards Marie Curie individual fellowship, I needed to find certain skill sets which I basically lacked, or I basically had them but needed to develop them. So this basically goes beyond my project. So I have this diagram right here, which shows that each project has certain knowledge base or needs certain knowledge base. Some of it as a fellow you could have, which is right here, and then some of it could be developed through the host institution and the secondment hosts, that is any research visits you would do as a part of your Marie Curie fellowship, and the entire knowledge base would be put towards work in terms of making this project work. So once again, so there is a technical expertise which is needed, which you personally, your supervisor, future supervisor, or secondment host may or may not have, but the host institution has different ways to facilitate that. So that kind of technical expertise or that kind of work management which is needed to make the project work, that is something which I had to think about. Of course, like beforehand, I had to make sure that which is the knowledge set, which is the knowledge base I need for this particular project to work, which kind of technical expertise I need for this project to work, which kind of work management, which kind of work environment I need. So that will basically go towards the overall development of the project, development of me as an individual fellow, and eventually it will get into the in terms of science, we could say the data interpretation kind of phase, but also the dissemination kind of phase. So I needed to know, I knew what different stakeholders are involved at various different stages of my work, and that is something I need to put it all together. So this is something which is a very critical part of writing a Marie Curie proposal or pitching in your idea to European Union, to H2020 Marie Curie program, and how one could achieve this. So I will tell you my part of the story and then lay out any different plans you could basically embark upon. So my story is towards finding host and host institutions starts from Google. So I do have a Google story as such, because I did have a couple of publications towards the end of my PhD, which got cited by a certain person who is now my second host. So he is basically a fire expert. I always wanted to collaborate with a fire expert. I wanted basically to make sure that they are working towards certain goal which matches with my goal. So that is where the ResearchGate came in. I got in touch with them via ResearchGate. I chatted with them. We eventually decided that okay, this could definitely work and we could work on this together. And as with that process, we started holding a Skype call. We said we started discussing ideas and whatnot. So with all that's one of the ways one could find a host and host institution. On the other hand, I would say, and it's not really on the other hand, but I would like to say that we are having this seminar from which is organized by EURAXESS India. EURAXESS website has a fantastic resource where basically thousands and thousands of Marie Curie individual fellowships, they are advertised all the way from the host institution themselves. Some of the host institution, like I just gave here an example. I'm not endorsing Oxford at all, but I'm basically saying like each individual institution, they also know the importance of Marie Curie Action individual fellowships. So what they basically like to do is they basically like to have a special web page assigned to it, saying that okay, the call is out, we would like to basically have this. Although they would call it a competition because it is a part of competition in a way, but this is basically our avenues for you to find the right host and right host institution. Try to, I think it's a multi-way process as such. So what I would like you to take away from this, and as I said here, I have just put it all there so you can read and basically get the gist of it, is like my so-called world of wisdom or a gyan, if you want to call it, is right here. Is like it takes time in building what any kind of relationship. That sounds like a dating kind of advice I'm giving over there, but it also is important towards the working relationship, that it takes time in building working relationships. So, and this is absolutely true when one doesn't already know the people you will be working with. So what's the key message here? They start early on. Like start thinking about it. If you are already, like if you are at a career stage where you know that there is going to be an academic break and you don't want that academic break to happen, nobody wants that. Once again, these are part of the like life experiences we are getting as an academician, I would say. So in that process, it is very important to plan ahead and start thinking about it sooner than later. And since each of this process, or each of the steps of the process needs a lot of thinking about where you want to take it, how you want to take it, which way you want to go, and with whom you want to go there. So this is very important part of actually designing the project. So definitely start early on, give it enough time for you and for others to have that idea sink in, and then that way you can take it forward and make it more and more compelling for European Union to see that why it is fundable. So when it comes to MHCA, as Bronwen has already fantastically said, that this is a career development fellowship. So it expects the training of the individual, and that training should happen through research. So that's the tagline, that's the keyword over there, which is very important for each of us. Those who want to pitch in this project, is very important for each of us to basically have that absorbed. That's the right word over here. So each project need certain kind of, what should I say, objectives. I mean, each project has different objective anyway, but on top of it, Marie Curie being a career development, these training objectives are also the outcomes of that respective individual fellowship. So in my case, as I said, I needed certain kind of knowledge set. That was part of it. That was one of my training objectives, two of my training objectives to be precise. And in that process, I also wanted to develop the knowledge of the policies, which I lack for much part. I'm interested in it, but I don't have a deeper understanding of it. So that is where basically the technical kind of training objectives could come in. And eventually the bigger, broader objectives, which basically include anything, as Bronwyn said. Once again, it could include anything, all the way from developing proficiency towards certain software, certain freewares, basically, which I definitely laid out because it is very important for the job market today as well. If I develop those skills, I should be able to land to 4 other places. I could not have gone to all 4 other places unless I have developed that particular skill set. So developing proficiency towards R, GitHub, and whatnot. So all these different training objectives I should be able to identify as an individual fellow pitching in this particular project. And then eventually within that process, you are looking into actually prepare a career development plan and receive any professional development training on that front. So as Bronwyn has already, once again, as I said, fantastic job of actually explaining what professional development or developmental training could mean. Once again, it could go all the way from peer reviewing publications to writing grants as such, and then eventually getting into a permanent job or long-term job in whatever sector you want to go. So everything once again falls under that.
Charlotte, we have lost your audio.
Is it better now?
We can't hear you now.
I'm able to hear you, Charuta.
We can see your presentation, we can see you, but your audio is not audible.
Am I audible
Suddenly
now?
just went off. Yes, now you are.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So okay, let me repeat then for a second. So each of these like technical objectives, training objectives you may have that you will achieve through research, actually conducting research on the topic you like, on the by pitching in idea you like, and pitching in area you are passionate about. That is also equally important, and that is something which you will tie together in terms of preparing your career development plan and receive any training on the host institution and or anywhere for that matter where you can get it. And in that process, the key part of Marie Curie individual fellowship is to be able to network with people across Europe, network with people beyond Europe as well. That is also equally valued in individual fellowship, because that is seen as a part of your career development as a researcher or a young scientist. So once again, what's the wow or word of wisdom over there? It's very important to have a clear understanding of what you want to achieve out of it. So it's very important, like what kind of technical skill set you want to develop or you want to diversify into, to be precise. Then what kind of other, like co-curricular, I would say, or co-academic kind of skill sets you want to develop, and eventually how you want to build your career out of it by fostering the existing as well as like whatever networking opportunities or whatever collaborative or collaboration kind of opportunities which would come during and beyond your Marie Curie fellowship. So one once again has to have a very clear idea like where your project sits for you and for European Union as well. So that is very important in that context. So when you have already thought about all these different things, it gets to the actual proposal writing stage or proposal writing phase. And since Bronwyn has already gone through various parts of it, so once again, when it comes to writing a proposal, it's not just a proposal. There are different parts of it. Some of them are administrative, some of them are technical, some of them are towards integrity, research integrity, which is equally important for every researcher to think about at every stage. And I cannot just I needed to say that in a way, I'm sorry. So what is essential, what's the take home here as I eventually get into the nuances of each of this, is it is essential to be informed of several major as well as minor bureaucratic ends, because that is going to affect the actual implementation of your work, your Marie Curie, whatever work you are proposing, your idea. In order for it to get materialized, it is important for you to know several bureaucratic ends of it. And how to achieve that, I'll get to that in a second. But once again, in order to achieve that, in order to get into that nuances, you need to be statistical. And what I mean by that is like there are certain numbers you definitely need to include by showing that this is how it is going to go in a positive direction, in the direction I want to take it. So once again, it is very important that you basically need to get everything right in that context. So actually getting to the proposal, there are 3 phases, as Bronwyn has already said. The excellence part, which basically has the 50% or 0.5 weighting of the entire proposal, and it basically is your actual science where you have to discuss it, you have to elaborate on it as such, but then you have to do it in a certain way, in a specific way, not going here and there. And how one should achieve this? My goodness, there is a downloadable template provided by European Union MHCA funding call right there. Nobody has to invent anything. Just just stick to it and be creative in fitting whatever information you feel is relevant for that particular project. So once again, it goes in general as in terms of the scientific, what should I say, scientific writing as such. It basically has all the aspect it needs, but apart from that, you need to go beyond science, which is a very important thing here, and to be able to address and to be able to see your project into a bigger dimension, as a bigger picture, where all these different what should I say, not criteria, but then all these different subheadings you will see, or subsections you will see in the actual template, actual proposal, which are absolutely important. And once again, I cannot not be more explicit about this. It is very important to be able to go beyond science, to be able to go beyond the scientific and jargony language which you always use, or we always use, I'm so sorry. So in that context, it's very important to be able to be what should we say, what's the right word? So we have to pitch it towards a layperson who could be expert in some other field, but should be able to get the gist of what you might be pitching in here. So all these different aspects basically need a lot of thinking when it comes to actual training purposes. What are your training objectives? As I already said, what are your different acquired knowledge sets which you already have, and how you will transfer them? Eventually getting into, as I said, statistical, like, so what are the actual qualifications of your supervisor? What are the hosting arrangements, meaning which lab you would be going to, or which university, which unit you will be going to, and how that is basically going to reinforce your independence to work in there, or how mature you are professionally to be able to handle that, and how you are able to achieve it. It's a two-way process, and one should be able to show that with the help of, as I said, existing template. Be like, just stick to it and be creative and fit the information that is relevant to the project. So moving to the next part, the actual impact part, about which not many scientists very clearly think about, or not many scientists want to think about. But once again, be real. We are in this world where we definitely need to communicate science, and not necessarily communicate, we basically need to advocate science on various fronts, and all fronts, if I'm not mistaken. So in that context, it is very important for you, for your future career, it is very important for you to be able to see a clear strategy for research communication. So it is very important to be able to get that message out. So it is not just the scientists or any peers, you would say, who are working in the same field, but it is going beyond the field. You definitely need to think about what are the different stakeholders. So for example, for my project, I definitely can develop certain kind of science, which is sort of excellent science, which Marie Curie definitely wants out of the individual fellowship. But I need to think how that science basically communicates or aids or helps wherever it can towards the policy circle. So all the way from, like, let's say scientists, the fire ecologists, forest ecologists and whatnot, all the way from there to actual policymakers and policy implementers, including the Indian Forestry Services. They are my stakeholders. So I definitely need to get this message out to them, and there are different ways you could plan this. So communication and engagement strategy has to be very clear when it comes to writing the proposal. So be creative over there. Try to find out what are the different platforms. Once again, there is academia, there is ResearchGate, as I already showed the screenshot earlier. So there are these different networks through which you can get into all these different platforms, and eventually to your message will get heard. And I would also advocate for Twitter in that context, that Twitter is something which is basically available to many, rather than ResearchGate or academia or very specific one. So if you want to run a actual Facebook page of your project, nothing like it. You are able to get that message out to more and more people, and that's the whole idea, and that's the whole point of doing this. I mean, I would like to see it that way. And in order to do that, I'm so sorry. In order to do that, the last part is equally important, where you are able to show that this project is feasible, how feasible it is. Are there any risk in it? If there are certain mitigation, there are certain risks, how I'm going to mitigate it. So then there should be a very clear, very feasible, and very tight kind of plan. That's the right word, that you should be able to show this in terms of a timeline, showing that this is the particular kind of activity I want to do. It will come under certain work package. That is another European Union, I think, terminology. One has to get acquainted with it. So that is something which needs to get shown, that is needs to get exhibited in the Gantt chart, where you can show the timeline of the entire project and timeline of each action. And then within that process, you need to show that you have the knowledge of infrastructure. You have already have been talking with the host institution to the level where you can actually manage these risks, mitigate them in a way, and how institutional environment, how the work environment in terms of infrastructure, to be precise, but also in terms of, what should I say, in terms of positive work environment, how appropriate it is. So it is very important, once again, to have a clear understanding of what are the different things which need to be highlighted here, and then be able to come up with a very feasible and a timely, that could be another right word over there, towards the actually achieving it. So when it comes to proposal writing, I'm just once again like summing up here in a way, saying that it is really a real deal. And what's the word of wisdom once again over here is, it is very important, and Bronwen has said it like 5 times, and I'm going to say it another time, said it before, saying it another time, that it is very important to read the actual funding call. And there is this guide for applicants which has several annexes as such. It is very important to pore over, that's the right word for it. Or from the Indian academia perspective, we always heard this term called as it, I want to learn it by heart. So you have to learn it by heart. You need to know each of this. And why it is important, because as soon as you absorb it, all the terminologies such as work packages, which you might not use elsewhere for any other fellowship perhaps, that is something which needs to be included in your proposal, which needs to come at every part of your proposal, one or the other way. So it is very important to be able to acquainted with every possible detail by studying all the European Union materials and supporting documents you have, and that also includes the actual proposal submission and evaluation. So these are certain actually things that you would say that, okay, I will just submit a grant and then eventually it will get evaluated, I don't have to think about it. No, not at all. You should be ahead of your evaluators in the sense that how they are actually going to evaluate it. And in that context, I personally went ahead and also used the actual reviewer evaluation form, and trying to see that what exactly the strengths and weaknesses which could be like negatively or positively evaluated towards my proposal. And that is why it is very important to be able to get hold of and get acquainted with each of these documents.
Charuta, sorry for the intervention. We're a bit running late. The time is almost up of our webinar, and we still have Praveen also to present. Could I kindly ask you to just a bit just wrap it up in 2 minutes?
Absolutely.
Sorry for the intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then within that, take as much as writing help one could need. One has to involve supervisors since the beginning and have conversations about it. It will only help you to write in a clear and jargon-free manner. Whatever you want to say, simply say it, leave no surprises. And it is very important to plan, like when are going to be your first draft, second draft, and third draft, and work with your supervisor to be able to achieve this. Don't keep it as a last thing. And just to like quickly give you like how my time has been, that I have been traveling lot and I have been getting excellent experiences in terms of science, in terms of professional, as well as the life experiences as such. So there are, once again, there are several tick boxes I have here, and I will keep having it as a part of, as I said, COVID-19 mitigation, as I have written over here. And in general, how do I feel when it comes to getting the Marie Curie fellowship? you can see that I'm a big fan of cartoons here. So I feel like Spider-Man. I just feel like with great power comes great responsibility. I need to be resourceful, responsible. I need to be stay on top of various different things. And when it comes to the times of stress, the mental health, I also need to be practicing mindfulness since the beginning to be able to achieve whatever I want to achieve. So with that, I would like to close, and I would like to say that this is where Marie Curie also comes in, who teaches us like we should not fear about this process, but we just need to understand it. And if you have any more questions, my email and my Twitter is right there. And I thank you so much for listening.
Charuta, thank you so much. You gave an excellent presentation about your own journey to the Marie Curie Fellowship, also about your own project, which is very interesting. And also thank you so much for the tips and also the deep insights you're giving also for the proposal writing process. I think it's very important to repeat those aspects. You know, Bronwyn mentioned them, but you already again emphasized them. I think this is very important for our attendees, and we know, of course, that you're having a very good time in the UK right now. Thank you so much. I just want to take a couple of questions with you now. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one question which came was when you were preparing your proposal, did you like work along the lines of your previous work, or did you adapt it towards the host institution or the lab or the institutional department you were applying to? Like how much did that influence your proposal? Like, did you stick to your research, to your previous work, or did you have to shift it a bit towards tailoring it towards the department's research area?
I mean, the answer is both yes and no. The first thing is I didn't tailor it to get it right for the host institution. I just tailored it to get it right for the project. So once again, it's just, yeah. So I mean, I needed certain kind of expertise when it comes to, let's say, for example, the conservation side. So that particular expertise, where it existed and how it existed, I basically got into those circles and asked, like, I need help on these particular things. So and then that host institution also had certain units as international development, where they did address these kind of global challenges. So once again, I got kind of help over there. I have to be 100% what should I say, honest over here, that it's not necessary that you would always get that help, especially at the proposal stage, but one should maneuver for it. And I think if one approaches with compassion and one approaches with, let's say, I want to learn from it, and this is something which we can achieve together in collaboration, host institutions are happy basically to lay out any plans. Or one of my experiences with the host institution is they did share some of the documents, the pre-populated kind of documents they had towards European Union MSCA. So do ask for that help. That is something which I would tie. So in a way, you don't have to tailor it because it is tied to you as an individual fellowship.
Okay, thank you so much. Very, very useful insight to that. Another question was, did you physically meet with your supervisor before, or was the correspondence, the contact, only through email while the application process?
Actually, no, I did not meet my supervisor, but somehow it has happened that, like, my secondment host, I did not meet him either, but we basically had let's say chats, nice kind of candid chats through ResearchGate, and eventually we started Skyping and chatting about science in general, what kind of science we are developing, how it can get further. Same happened with my actual supervisor, who came into picture actually little later, but then three of us started having like Skype calls. But I had the kind of idea I wanted to pitch in. That is something which is very important, that I mean, this is your project, this is your idea, so it shouldn't be work for other people who would be collaborating with you. So it is, as long as it is clear to you, you can then enhance the dialogue or facilitate the kind of support you need. And that is where the resource, being resourceful comes in handy, that you should be able to have Skype calls with them. Yeah, I mean, so I had Skype calls with them, and eventually I met them. Like, but towards the paperwork and all the, when I actually got the grant, then I needed to do certain kind of paperwork by being there, by being at the host institution physically, and then I actually met my supervisor.
Okay, okay. Thank you for answering this question. Last question, Charuta. We are facing right now very challenging times, Brexit, COVID. Has this affected you as in your postdoc studies or in your career development? Like, because now this batch, which is trying to apply and getting the fellowship, we don't know how the situation will develop, but you already have the fellowship. Can you share a bit about your experience right now being in the UK? Like, how much is it affecting your research right now?
I mean, once again, like technically my European Union, fellowship ended on 11th of June. And I had last 3 months, but I had my project did get impacted because I was planning the science policy actual workshop or any intellectual benefit kind of platform where I could actually share this with stakeholders, as I said, the other end of the stakeholders, which I absolutely think about all the time. I had to cancel it. I had to, cancel planning it as such. And as a part of, that's why I said on my last slide that as a part of that mitigation, we were already thinking, my supervisor and my secondment host and both of my supervisor, I would say, and any collaborators, that we should basically write a policy brief instead of that, and we should basically get into those circles where it could get heard easily, where we wanted it to be heard. So that is where we are doing. So of course these challenges are going to come. COVID has exacerbated them more than anything. So I definitely say that yes, of course I had certain actions which got affected, but then I had to come up with a mitigation plan, which I definitely discussed with my project officer and said that okay, this is how. And then eventually with the help of certain advisories European Union have, I was able to get the project extended internally at the end of my host institution. So that is one of those things which one needs to do as a part of Marie Curie, that to be able to handle the administrative works and administrative tasks as such.
Thank you so much, Charuta, for giving a testimony, also talking about the challenges which you are facing, or many are facing right now, and how to handle them. We proceed to our final speaker for today, Dr. Praveen Kumar, who is the chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, the Indian chapter. Praveen, thank you for holding on so long. It has been, of course, already you've been the last speaker and you have to wait, but we saved, let's say, the best for the end. Thank you, Praveen. The floor is yours. Praveen, your mic seems to be muted. Now it should work, yeah.
It's visible?
Yes, thank you, Praveen. Please go on.
So thanks, Dr. Kumar and the speakers for inviting Indian chapter to give a little bit of what we are doing as far as Marie Curie Alumni Association is concerned. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Brahmane and Dr. Charuta for giving a better perspective of Marie Curie fellowship. I hope you all are motivated to apply for that very prestigious fellowship, because this is one of the best fellowship I would say in the world, which is having a highest amount of fellowship which has been paid to a researcher. Not only the allowances, you get different research allowances, and also you get which I will be discussing. So the question comes you got this Marie Curie fellowship, let's say, then what will happen? Okay, so that's what up to now you were hearing from Dr. Charuta or from Dr. Brahmane, that how to get this fellowship. But what I am here, I am going to tell you what after once you get this fellowship. So that's what we have this Marie Curie Alumni Association. So Dr. Brahmane has told you about this individual fellowship, where you have to write a proposal to get this fellowship in any of the country in Europe. However, there are 3 other fellowships as well. One is called the ITN, Innovation Training Network. We had a previous seminar on that to get a PhD degree from the European Commission. We have another fellowship called the RISE, which basically to exchange the staff from Europe to India. And we also have one more called a co-fund. Basically, this is for doctoral and postdoctoral fellowship. So all these fellowships comes under the umbrella of European Commission Horizon 2020. So if you get any of this fellowship, not only is individual fellowship, then what you can do, you can be a part of this Marie Curie Alumni Association. So this is and first and foremost requirement that you should have any of this fellowship to become a member of Marie Curie Alumni Association. So what we does, why we this much is necessary to petition. Have it. Okay, so basically Marie Curie Alumni Association is actually a society where we use all our members young minds to get for the society benefits. We use because we all Marie Curie fellows are distributed around the world, so we use them to advise for several government maybe across the country sectors and economy and scientific discipline. We try to establish the relation wherever any government or any agency is required as far as information and knowledge is concerned. So with that, how we work, basically once you get this fellowship, Marie Curie fellowship, you become a Marie Curie alumni member. And being a member, you can select a board. So that we have a general assembly. Last year, this year we could not have the general assembly because of this COVID. But last year we had in Vienna, and then there we have selected a board. So basically we have a 6 ordinary member and 5 executive committee member in board, and we have a 11 working group and 36 chapter is working around the globe. And all these board which we formed through general election works under the European Commission. So our funding comes under the European Commission. This is the photo which I have taken during the last General Assembly which happened in Vienna. This year we could not have the General Assembly. So that is why we have to do all the voting and everything online to select our board. This is how the Marie Curie Alumni Association works. So we have a chair. Under that we have a vice chair and treasurer and secretary, and we have a 6 ordinary board member. And we also have working groups, which I am going to discuss a little bit of. And we have chapters. Every country has one chapters, like I am a chair for the Indian. And all these board member and all this infrastructure works under the European Commission. So our current board member has a very variety. Like chair Dr. Mustafa is from Australia, Valencia is from Poland, and Fernanda from from Dutch, Maria from Germany. So we have all variety. And last year we have 2 Indians as well. But this year we could not have any Indians in the board member. And we have 11 working groups. Like you want to do research, so you need to do a lot of networking. So you need to understand how to write grants and awards, how to get the career development. So all these necessary counseling we do it for all Marie Curie alumni members, and also for the common public services like this. We have around 33 chapters, which is spread around the globe. Indian chapter is one of them, and we do a lot of activity. Like Indian chapter is involving a lot of dissemination activities. Like we used to go to university to motivate the very good students to apply for the various fellowship, to disseminate the information what actually opportunities are available for them. All these events we do it. So once you become once you get this Marie Curie fellowship, you can be the part of our this societal activities as well, which gives you a little bit satisfaction that whatever you gain from the commission or from the Indian government, you are returning back to the society. So this is some of the event which we have done in the last year. But basic idea what MCA offers, that now you will find that we have around 17,000 members around the globe under this Marie Curie Alumni Association. They are having a various expertise. So they are having an interdisciplinary research expertise. So once after completing your PhD degree or maybe postdoc, being a Marie Curie fellow, you can use them. You can use them for networking. You can use them for the collaboration. You can do the mutual understanding. Basically, you can write different sectors proposals. you can form a various debates, career enhancement work. So, and more or less nowadays you see a lot of industry-oriented research is going. So that's where you can find out some of these Marie Curie fellow who is working in the industry. So that is where you can utilize all the network which has been created by Marie Curie Alumni Association. Apart from that, see, once you finish Marie Curie fellowship, then after you also can use the benefit from the European Commission. Like being a member of Marie Curie Alumni Association, you can have a micro grants by which you can travel from one country to other country. Like suppose you want to attend any conference which is going to happen somewhere in Europe or maybe in USA, you can apply for this granted. This is the not only while you're Marie Curie tenure, but also after the Marie Curie tenure, you can apply up to when you are involved in the research. You can apply for micromedia grant. Like if you want to write some general publication where you have to pay the fee. So we can support, if you acknowledge the Marie Curie Alumni Association, we can support that publication. You can, if you want to travel for any conference or maybe any collaboration work, collaborative work, we can, we have this micro travel grant or micro one world grant. Like if you want to travel in Europe, you can use the micro one world grants, which generally we give once in a year. Also, we have every year we have a general assembly to discuss our progress and also to have a layout for the next year. So we give some micro general assembly grant also for our association members. So to get there and gather and actually make a benefit of this which we have it. We also try to motivate our members by giving them award. And you may know that some of the Marie Curie alumni members also got this Nobel awards. So you can understand how competitive these awards are. So we have 4 awards basically. One is Marie Curie Alumni Career Award. So we whomsoever is doing very great in their career, we used to deliver this award to that person. We have a, suppose you want to, if you have developed something very innovative, technology, then we have a MCA Best Innovator Award. Similar, if you are doing a lot of work for the society, whereby you are involving Marie Curie alumni, we give this award to those persons. And also, if you are doing the very best for this Marie Curie Alumni Association, we have a Marie Curie Outstanding Award. With that, I think Sarada has taken a lot of time, so I have cut short my presentation. I would like to thank Dr. Samrat for inviting Marie Curie Alumni Chapter for this workshop. Thank you.
Dr. Praveen, thank you so much for your presentation about the alumni chapter, the Marie Curie Alumni Chapter. This is the fellowship is a lifetime achievement, as we know, and it doesn't end with the fellowship. Actually, you become part of a very large global family. As Dr. Praveen was showing you, also in India, there are is a huge number of alumni, and it's a great lifetime network which you can use. And also you can use the offers and the activities to develop your career further under the umbrella of the Marie Curie alumni. Thank you, Dr. Praveen, so much for being with us. I would like to ask the other 2 panelists to switch on their cameras. We have reached the end of today's webinar. If we still have many who are logged in, I had a couple of questions which I think would still be good to answer, and we had a huge number of questions coming in, and we're sorry if we were not able to answer all of them. But the good news is that you will get the presentations of all the speakers, of all 3 speakers, with their email contacts included, and also the recording of this webinar will be made available to you shortly after the webinar. So don't you worry if your question has not been addressed. You have the possibility to approach our panelists. Let me just ask Praveen, a question to you was, how did you find your host institution? Like, how was it for you to look for a suitable host institution in your field?
Yeah, for me, I wrote a couple of professors after submitting my PhDs. So some of the professors has replied to me. Then after I selected which subject is matching with me, whatever research they were doing. that's how I got to get in touch with Professor Enrique Calleja and Professor Richard Torcher. So they both were they both were working in the same area. So I had two hosts in a similar department for my fellowship.
So as Praveen said, he wrote a couple of emails to different potential supervisors. Charuta mentioned, and Bronwyn also, there are different engine tools you can look for hosting offers. The EURAXESS India website, if you go there, you will find that there are still many hosting offers available. So hurry up. If you have not identified a host, go to the EURAXESS website and look for a potential host. Let's move on to one more. I think interesting question was, someone says he applied and got a score of 89.6%, but he was not selected for the funding. Can he or she apply again with the same proposal, just modified? Bronwyn, what would you suggest?
So provided that you still meet the eligibility criteria, then absolutely you can resubmit. And I would encourage you to do so. Just be careful when you address the weaknesses that you don't inadvertently get rid of one of the strengths. And so this is something that we see happens quite often. So just to be aware of that. And really think very carefully. They might have suggested something. It doesn't mean you have to include it, but then you need to be clear and make sure that the proposal is very clear as to why it wasn't included. So for example, if a suggestion of a secondment, how you think about why they might have suggested it and how you are going to address that maybe in an alternative way if you don't actually want to undertake a secondment. Just one thing, the evaluators do not know it's a resubmission until the final consensus stage. And then only at that point will they be informed it was a resubmission. And then the question that they'll be asked is mostly to, if the score is lower, to ensure that the comments really justify the lower score. There is no requirement or indication or anything like that that they have to score you higher. And the evaluators do not know.
More questions are pouring in, but we'll only take two more. Again, Bronwyn, there is a question. I already have obtained a fellowship, a Marie Curie individual fellowship. Can I apply for a second one?
Yes, you can apply for a second one. What you need to be clear as to why you need and why would benefit from a second one, particularly if you're still undertaking your current fellowship.
Okay, good. And the last question, which is a bit specific, but I think also has a general appeal. I have chosen the host institution at the University of Porto, and I would like to add one professor from the University of Cambridge as for multidisciplinary work collaboration. Is that possible to take a co-supervisor, basically?
Yes, you can have another co-supervisor. That's absolutely fine. And what you want to demonstrate in the proposal is how they will be integrated. Is it termed simply of supervising in terms of management, or will you go and spend some time in their lab in Cambridge? And if you are going to spend time in the lab, will that be a formal secondment situation where the co-supervisor will have supervisory responsibility, primary supervisory responsibility during the secondment? Or if it's more of you going and visiting and learning and getting some expertise in terms of what they call a short visit. But I say short visit because it doesn't actually have to be short. It really depends on what's needed. So it can actually be longer than whatever you might think short is.
Okay, so one should be just specific what role that co-supervisor will have. Charuta and Praveen, you had secondments? You have second in your?
Yeah. I mean, if I could, then I would add. I mean, I would just highlight what Bronwyn has already said. I think secondments are really valued because the mobility is the keyword here, right? So if you are able to go to another place, extend your network within that process, get the skills, or diversify into something which you always wanted to, so that is something which you are able to achieve with this. If you can actually go to Cambridge, you are able to network with people over there, so that would be just fantastic for your career, and you are able to do that same process within I mean, I didn't hear the university name at first, like whatever country it was, and then the second country would be UK. So you do have, like doubled your chances of getting collaborations and networks for now and for future, right? So it is very valued in a way that, and why not, that if it is mobility, the funding is basically set aside for that, for your travels, for your networking, then I think one should take an opportunity and say that, okay, although the person may or may not like to travel, but one should travel and should be able to get both, professional as well as life experiences.
Absolutely. Praveen, anything to add? You did a secondment during your postdoc?
Yes. I agree with Charuta and Dr. Branwine. That secondment is give you a little bit of strength, because I also had the secondment in actually EPFL, where I was working with Professor Richard Norchel. So that's what, okay, you will add up your knowledge, and you will add up a lot of other value to your project, where you will have a lot of multidisciplinary research, which is the demand of the day.
Okay. Well, thank you so much to all the speakers, Bronwyn, Charuta, Praveen. I think it was a very informative and a very good webinar session. Dear attendees, I hope you also enjoyed it and you got a very good input and information. And now please go to your laptops, not today, maybe it's Friday, but from Monday onwards, start with the proposal writing. And good luck to everyone. Wishing you a nice weekend. Thanks for joining. Bye to the speakers. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.